The worst part about going to a foreign country is not knowing what to do, not knowing where to have fun, not having any guides, not having anyone to be with, being lonely, not knowing what to do from day to day. One of the worst things you can ever feel in a foreign country is loneliness. Sometimes you go to a foreign country, you don't have friends who've gone with you. Maybe you're an expatriate. Maybe you're a worker in a foreign country. Perhaps you're in Vietnam. Perhaps you go to Vietnam, outsourced by your IT company, and you don't know what to do or who to meet. Well, Vietnamese Wingman or VietnamWingman.com is here to help you. If you're looking for friends, language partners, relationships, marriage, Vietnamese Wingman, VietnamWingman.com is here to help you to have a great time in Vietnam, meet somebody, meet a friend, meet a woman, meet a wife. They are here to help you do that. So check out Vietnam Wingman and enjoy the rest of the story. Okay, along with my explanation of Vietnam Wingman, who's out here to help you just in case you're interested in retiring to Vietnam. Now, some Americans are interested in retiring to Southeast Asia specifically because they're retiring, cost of living is high, they don't have very much pension. Let's say you only have a pension of $20 or $30 or $40,000 a year. Are you going to live in America? Do you have a paid-off house? Do you have paid-off cars and other assets? Or do you have a lot of liabilities? Chances are your pension may or may not be enough for you to stay in America. Or maybe it is enough, and maybe you just want to move someplace warm, someplace safe, someplace with beautiful women. Maybe you're not married, maybe you've never been married, and maybe you're interested in meeting somebody to spend the rest of your life with. A lot of Americans choose the Philippines. Other Americans who do get around more and have traveled, a lot of them choose other parts of Southeast Asia, specifically Thailand, to retire to. And there are three other options that sometimes are lesser talked about. One is Vietnam, the other is Cambodia, and the other one is Laos. Now, more likely, people would want to go to Vietnam specifically because the cost of living is ridiculously low. The same might apply to Cambodia. However, there's a slightly different culture there. I would say, after personal experience, that Thailand or Vietnam or the Philippines might be the easiest ones for the typical American to adapt to. How to retire in Vietnam, cost, visas, and more. So I think what I want to do is I want to actually have a couple of informative videos because I've seen there's complaints and there's accusations that we don't teach anything as Passport Bros, that all we do is we get on and we make fun of stitched videos from TikTok. So this way, if I continue to make a couple of informative videos, no one can ever accuse all Passport Bros of not teaching anything in their videos. So anyway, how to retire in Vietnam. Okay, so first of all, as one of the most welcoming and mysterious countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam has a lot to offer retirees with over 2,000 miles of coastline, small fishing villages, ancient Buddhist temples. Vietnam is a popular retirement destination for those seeking tranquility on a budget. But before you take the leap and retire in Vietnam, it's important to understand what the move entails so you can properly plan an overseas retirement. You may want to consider working with a financial advisor who can make sure your finances are properly put in order to prepare for the adventure. All right, I'm not going to read everything. I'm only going to read key points, but you can look at the link, which I'll post. This smartasset.com. Now, what's interesting is this was made on January 10th, 2023 by Ashley Kilroy. So what's funny is more and more Americans constantly are thinking about retiring to a foreign country. And there's numerous reasons. Obviously, safety in America is a concern. America is not as safe as it used to be. On top of that, cost of living is high. So your money isn't going as far as it could be. Now, let me just say it like this. If you have a $30,000 pension or more, if you retire in Vietnam, you basically retire a king. You're a king in your own village, basically. When you move, if you move there, you go there maybe on vacation, you scope it out. But if you retire there and you're making $30,000 on a pension, you're a king. When you move there, when you imagine you walk into any of their stores and everything in their stores you can pretty much buy, with the exception of possibly like cars or very expensive jewelry. You can go into any of their stores, you can shop, and anything you want, it's just yours. You're able to dominate the markets. And not only that, the people are friendly. So for the most part, you don't have to worry about anybody trying to rob you. But let's I don't want to digress too much. So anyway, what's the cost of living in Vietnam? Before you sell your home and buy a one-way ticket to Vietnam, you should compare the cost of living. As many financial advisors would tell you, you'll want to access the total cost of living in another country, or I'm sorry, you'll want to assess the total cost of living in another country versus the cost of living in the United States. Now, I'll tell you right now, the cost of living in the United States, obviously, as you know, it's pretty high. I would say that, well, first of all, if you know anything about New York, the cost of like a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is about $4,000. The cost of a one-bedroom in Brooklyn is about $3,000, give or take. The cost of a one-bedroom in Queens is between $2,000 and $3,000, depending upon where you are. So for that same $2,000 or $3,000, you'd be able to have a beautiful condo in Vietnam on just $500 a month. So you think about that. To pay for a house in America, $2,000 a month is about your mortgage, tax, and insurance combined, right? If you factor in the cost of utilities, you're talking about $2,500 a month, give or take. Maybe more, maybe less. But in Vietnam, you could have all of that, a swimming pool and the warm weather, $500 a month. $15 a day, maybe even $600 a month, but we're talking about $15 a day. At the most, $600 a month. It's a fraction of the cost of living in America, a fraction. That also applies for Philippines, and it also applies to Thailand. As some expats have already pointed out, it's actually cheaper to live in Vietnam than it is to live in the Philippines. The difference is that in the Philippines, people speak English, so a lot of expatriates would rather go there because they speak English, even if it costs a little bit more. Okay, let's get back to the story. In Vietnam, rent is on average 538% cheaper than in New York City. 538% cheaper. While your cost of living and rent will depend on your lifestyle as well as the city you live in, your dollar will go much further in Vietnam than in the United States. A three-course dinner. Now, one of the things when I was in Asia and Southeast Asia, when I would go out, I'd take a woman out. Sometimes her friends would come with us. It was so cheap for me to buy a meal that I didn't mind buying it. Obviously, I didn't mind taking the woman I was with on dates, but I also didn't mind if one of her friends was with us, because her friend may have hung out with us or whatever. I didn't mind paying for everybody because I understood right away, the cost of what I would spend in America for just one person. I could buy basically food for four people if I so chose. So they're saying a three-course dinner for two at a mid-range restaurant is about $25. I can attest to that because I actually have paid less than that for a full-course meal for two people or three. Gasoline runs approximately $4 per gallon. Now, guess what? Here in New York, right now, gas is $3.85 a gallon. And if you tried to buy full serve, it's $4 plus. It's actually like $4.85. I was just passing a Mobile Mart coming here. A bottle of medium quality wine is about to set you back $9. I personally, if I were you and I went overseas, I wouldn't be drinking because, drinking is bad for your health. And then on top of that, it also makes you thirstier because of the alcohol. But to imagine that, if you want to have wine is much, much cheaper. A lot of the taxes on cigarettes and wine are what make them so expensive here. But if you go there, everything's much, 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 much cheaper. Getting a visa in Vietnam. While Vietnam does not have a retirement visa, there are several options for individuals who want to retire in Vietnam. Americans can apply for a visa to Vietnam through any Vietnamese embassy and will be approved for either 6 months or 1 year, but can only stay in the country for 3 months at a time. If you plan to live in Vietnam, you then have two options: make visa runs every 3 months or get an extension on your visa. Getting a visa extension incurs high costs, so most people make a visa run. This means that they leave the country for periods of a few hours to a few days. Then they can return to Vietnam and their 3-month visit can begin again. Unlike many destinations around the world these days, Vietnam has not yet adopted a visa specifically for remote workers. So when it comes to these visa runs, this is one of the reasons why you see so many people hop around Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, or the Philippines. They make visa runs. The Philippines lets you stay in the Philippines for 30 days. Thailand was trying to make it so you could stay in Thailand for 90 days. However, I believe I made a video already talking about Thailand and how you can retire in Thailand and some of the requirements Thailand has for you to retire in it. I'll post the link to that video inside the URL section of this video, just in case you're interested in Thailand. Taxes in Vietnam. If you become a resident of Vietnam, you'll be subject to taxes on any income you earn, regardless if it was earned in Vietnam or not. These tax rates do not exceed 5% unless it comes from an inheritance or gift, which is taxed at 10%. Non-residents are taxed on income earned inside Vietnam at a rate at 20%. Now, this is only if you're a resident and you want to pay taxes there. They are not taxed on income earned outside the country. Keep in mind that even if you live outside the U.S., you'll still need to file a U.S. tax return as an expatriate. You'll also have to file even if you don't end up having to pay any U.S. taxes. If you'd like to forecast your tax burden more specifically, you may want to consult with a tax expert who is familiar with U.S. and Vietnam tax laws. Healthcare in Vietnam. Healthcare in Vietnam does not enjoy a great reputation. The World Health Organization ranks the nation's healthcare system as 160 out of 189. Vietnam has a universal healthcare system that combines Eastern and Western medicine. Everyone in Vietnam has access to basic medical care, and the cost and access to healthcare can range quite a bit between rural areas and cities. In urban areas, both public and private hospitals exist. Expats tend to favor private hospitals because they more closely match the standards of care that they are used to in their home countries. Most expats will get private health coverage while living in Vietnam. Most experts will advise that you get a plan that will reimburse you for costs while in Vietnam so that when you pay for coverage, you can get your money back. Health insurance typically costs about $60 per month in Vietnam. $60 per month. Here's a question, guys. How much are you paying in America for healthcare? Yeah, you don't want to answer that, do you? Now, once again, they do say that Vietnam's healthcare is not stellar. It's definitely not up there with South Korea or Japan's healthcare. South Korea and Japan's healthcare is superior to most of the Southeast Asian countries by far. I would say the only exceptions being like Singapore. I also have to say that Thailand's healthcare systems and Thailand's pharmaceutical access, I was very impressed by those. So Thailand is always a good choice, but they're saying, yeah, Vietnam, the healthcare isn't perfect, but you do have access to basic healthcare and it's not very expensive. Now, keep in mind, if you're a traveler, you can have travel insurance. So travel insurance can actually insure you. Usually it's up to $10,000 on most airfare. But if you pay more for traveler's insurance, you can have up to $100,000 of travel insurance. So traveler's insurance is always an option. Vietnam housing. Many retirees choose to live in beach houses such as Nha Trang or Da Nang. It's important to note that whether you choose to live in one of the cities or a larger lake like Hanoi, your cost of living and housing costs will vary. However, these costs are likely going to be much less than they would be if you were living in the U.S. The average home is $429 per square foot in the city center. When comparing Ho Chi Minh City to New York City boasts home costs that are 220% higher. Overall, the cost of housing in Vietnam is significantly lower in the United States than in the United States. Home buying process in Vietnam. In Vietnam, only Vietnamese people can purchase a property. Now, right here, this is one of the reasons why passport bros who marry and choose to live in other countries. This is one of the ways you get around that. You marry somebody, chances are you probably having children with this person. This woman, she can buy the house. Now, you will obviously be getting your pension and you'll be living with her. So you'll basically buy the property through her, and your children will inherit the property from the both of you. A foreigner can buy a 50-year lease on an apartment or a home. With this lease, the buyer gets all rights to the apartment and can renew it after 50 years. If the building that the apartment is in has to be sold, the buyer will get a portion of the proceeds. It's important to note that foreigners cannot sublet these homes. So here's the thing. 50-year lease, chances are you're not going to live that long. Chances are you're probably already 40 or 50. I don't see you making it to 100, but there's always a possibility you could. It's a 50-year lease. Chances are you may not even want to live in the same place for 50 years. So that's one of the reasons why people do the visa hops and the visa runs. It's because you can bounce around. Think about it like this. You could stay in Vietnam, and then you could stay in Thailand, and then you could stay in the Philippines, and then you could stay in Cambodia. And each time you could basically tour multiple countries in that area, because there's a lot of those countries in that area, including Japan and South Korea, which aren't that far away because they're about a 3-hour flight, maybe a 4-hour flight tops. And you could tour that entire area, and it would still be a fraction of the cost of living that you have here in America, a fraction. Now, if you did choose to have a home base, you lease an apartment or a condo, maybe in the Philippines, maybe in Vietnam, and they're talking about you could get a 50-year lease if you wanted to. So that is a possibility. Now, Thailand was talking about you being able to buy properties, and they were talking about how much money they want you to invest, because Thailand really wants foreign investment. So there's always options, but Vietnam is cheaper. Safety in Vietnam. While the United States government does not have any restrictions on visiting Vietnam, there are a few things that you may want to consider before moving there. The large cities in Vietnam, such as Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, often have smog advisories. Driving is very different from at home, so often people struggle to learn custom driving skills. Now watch this. The crime rate is very low in Vietnam, but access to Western healthcare is limited. So personal safety may also be of issues for some foreigners. You want to know why the crime rate's low in Vietnam? It's for the same reason it's low in China and most of those communist countries or former communist satellite states. It's because they execute criminals. If these people do anything to you as a foreigner, their government comes down on them like a hammer. Those are the countries I like to visit. Not countries like Brazil, where they've got so much crime that their own people aren't safe. Not countries like Brazil, where you've got feminists starting some shit and trying to run you out. No. I go to countries where the government itself is totalitarian, okay? It's just that simple. I don't mind China. I will say China has some serious smog issues, but other than that, let me tell you something. As a black man, I've never felt safer. I didn't have to worry about any stray bullets from some Pookie or Ray Ray. I never had to worry about some cop putting his knee on my neck. I never had to worry about 5 cops jumping out of a car and chasing me down and beating me to death. I never had to worry about cops tasing me to death. Oh, no. No. Never, not once. Anyway, the bottom line, Vietnam has dreamy landscapes, friendly locals, a low crime rate, and an inexpensive living. However, it also has no retirement visa scheme. And access to health care, while improving, is still not up to Western standards. Now, here's the thing. You can read this yourself, but here's the thing. Me personally, I was born in America. I'm always going to be an American. I don't intend on selling my housing properties that I have here in America. I don't intend on selling them. I would rent them out and then use parts of the proceeds to move abroad and live abroad and have extra money coming into me. Because you think about it, imagine this. Imagine that you own a house here in America. Imagine it's paid off and imagine you rented it out. What would you rent that house out for? Let's say $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month. Those are actually low numbers. Let's say you rented out the entire house and it was $4,000 a month. Let's just say that. Let's say you had two sets of tenants, each one paying you $2,000, maybe a little bit more per month. Let's say you rent it out for $4,000 a month and the house is paid off. The only thing that has to be paid on the house is the taxes. So that means when all is said and done, chances are, if you're renting it for $4,000 a month, chances are you are earning a profit of at least $2,500 to $3,000 a month. That is 500 times more than you need to live in Vietnam. As you just saw, they said it's over 500% higher to live in New York City than it is to live in Vietnam. If you have property here, you can rent that property. You can live anywhere else in the world that you want where the cost of living is low. I would say the only exception might be Singapore, because Singapore cost of living is very high. Some parts, maybe Japan, cost of living is very high. South Korea, the cost of living isn't extremely high. It depends where you live. The countryside is actually very low. In fact, in Japan, I did a story not too long ago about Nagano. They were offering to sell you houses less than $3,000. Houses. In certain parts of Japan, the houses are dying. There's not anybody there to fill them, and they're looking for people to come in and make the investment. So let's understand this. Personally, if I need access to healthcare, I would probably obviously keep my American citizenship just so I can always fly back to America and always have access to healthcare. Now, for basic things, healthcare in Vietnam is adequate. And I'm talking about basic things, like if you just need a checkup or whatever it is, something basic. Those things you can easily get in Vietnam. Now, most people don't want to move forever. Most people want to be able to come back to America because they have family or they have some ailing grandparents, parents, whatever it is. So you wouldn't give up your citizenship, but you would move overseas and you could spend your money like a king. Because you got to remember, tax filing is digital now. Like, for example, right now I'm doing my taxes. All of my paperwork is digital. I can file my taxes from the moon if I had to, because it's all digital. You just send signals back and forth. The money transfers are digital. So as soon as I get my tax return, I wake up a week later after filing my taxes, poof, money's there. It's already in the bank account. State return comes about a month later, tops. It's just automatic. It's digital. You don't even have to send paper back and forth anymore. It's paperless. So there are ways that you can be a remote worker, or if you're lucky enough to work for a business that outsources you to another country, you can go to these other countries. You can live like a damn king and save your money. Now, I want you to notice something because I'm about to end this video. With the exception of the mention of Vietnam Wingman, I did not even talk about the women at all. So some of you might already be married. You might decide you want to move with your wife to another country. Some of you may be looking for a wife in marriage and you want to move to another country. Some of you may not be looking for anybody at all and you just want to work and you just want to earn money and you want to save a lot of money. Living abroad, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, those are steadily becoming better options for Americans than staying here in America. And the last thing I will say is this. Today, February 1st, Wednesday, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates again, 0.25%. The interbank lending rate is now getting closer and closer to, it depends what you want to count it as, but it's definitely approaching 5%. Other adjustable rate interest rates between banks, such as credit cards and arm loans, wherever they may exist, those things are getting pretty high. If you want to get a mortgage right now in America, you're looking at a 6%, maybe more. It depends on your credit. It varies between everybody, 6, 7, 5. So ultimately, cost of living is still rising because inflation here is still rising. The nasty little secret is that if the Federal Reserve does not raise the interbank lending rate to match what the inflation rate is, then they're not really fighting inflation. They're hurting you and making it harder for you to get mortgages and to get loans. But ultimately, they're not really fighting inflation because they can't. You can't fight inflation if your interest rates are not meeting the inflation rate. In fact, you have to have interest rates slightly above the inflation rate. And that's just a simple fact that you don't learn in school. They don't teach you this shit. And even if they did teach it to you, half of you watching TikTok so you don't pay attention. So that's basically all I had to say. How do you think this sounds? Maybe you should plot a trip to Vietnam, see what it's like. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you'll like the people. Maybe you won't. Maybe you should see what your options are. The most important thing to remember, if you take nothing away from these videos, is that you have more options. The whole point of all of these videos is for you to learn to exercise your options.